Good evening again, everybody. My name is Colin Murphy. I'm a commissioner on the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability, and I wanted to give you a warm welcome to this event. So tonight's session is a discussion about sustainability, racial justice, and socioeconomic equity to uncover the current gaps and obstacles to addressing climate change in Bloomington. The Bloomington Commission on Sustainability, recognizes that while the city has a climate action plan, Bloomington lacks an equity impact assessment. Equity impact assessments allow communities to identify gaps in service provision based on historic injustices to ensure that governments leave no one behind in their climate policies. To build towards such an assessment for our community, special guest speakers Maribel Nzewu Tobias and Colin Miller from Environmental Justice Solutions will speak about their work to institute a racial equity impact assessment for their community in Oakland, California. And now I'll hand it off to Colin Miller, fellow Commissioner Najla Rotsong, and Alicia Hardy to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Najla Rotsong, and I am a co-chair of BCAUSE, the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability, and I'm going to give you this 5-minute presentation on the Just Transition movement. Next slide, please. The origin of the Just Transition movement. Just transition strategies were first forged by labor unions and environmental justice groups, rooted in low-income communities of color who saw the need to phase out the industries that were harming workers, community health, and the planet, and at the same time provide just pathways for workers to transition to other jobs. It was rooted in workers defining a transition away from polluting industries in alliance with fence line and frontline communities. The environmental justice movement grew out of a response to the system of environmental racism, wherein communities of color and low-income communities have been and continue to be disproportionately exposed to and negatively impacted by hazardous pollution and industrial practices. Its roots are in the civil rights movement and are in sharp contrast to the mainstream environmental movement, which has failed to understand or address this injustice. The environmental justice movement emphasizes bottom-up organizing, centering the voices of those most impacted, and shared community leadership. There are 8 principles of the Just Transition movement. Principle 1, buen vivir. This means that we can all live well without living better at the expense of others. Workers, community residents, women, and indigenous peoples around the world have a fundamental human right to clean, healthy, and adequate air, water, land, food, education, and shelter. We must have just relationships with each other and with the natural world, of which we are a part. The rights of peoples, communities, and nature must supersede the rights of the individual. Meaningful work. A Just Transition centers on the development of human potential, creating opportunities for people to learn, grow, and develop to their full capacities and interests. We are all born leaders, and a regenerative economy supports and nurtures that leadership. In the process, we are transforming ourselves, each other, our communities, and our society as a whole. Meaningful work is life-affirming. 3, self-determination. All peoples have the right to participate in decisions that impact their lives. This requires democratic governance in their communities, including in our workplaces. Communities must have the power to shape their economies as producers, as consumers, and in our relationships with each other. Not only do we have the right to self-determination, but self-determination is one of our greatest tools to realize the world we need. The people who are most affected by the extractive economy, the frontline workers and the fence line communities, have the resilience and expertise to be in the leadership of crafting solutions. 4, equitable redistribution. We must work to build new systems that are good for all people and not just a few. Just transition must actively work against and transform current and historical social inequities based on race, class, gender, immigrant status, and other forms of oppression. Just transition fights to reclaim capital and resources for the regeneration of geographies and sectors of the economy where these inequities are most pervasive. 5, regenerative ecological economics. Just transition must advance ecological resilience, reduce resource consumption, restore biodiversity and traditional ways of life, and undermine extractive economies, including capitalism that erode the ecological basis of our collective well-being. This requires a relocalization and democratization of primary production and consumption by building up local food systems, local clean energy, and small-scale production that are sustainable economically and ecologically. This also means producing to live well without living better at the expense of others. 6, culture and tradition. Capitalism has forced many communities to sacrifice culture and tradition for economic survival. It has also defaced and destroyed land held as sacred. Just transition must create inclusionary spaces for all traditions and cultures, recognizing them as integral to a healthy and vibrant economy. It should also make reparations for land that has been stolen and or destroyed by capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, genocide, and slavery. 7, solidarity. A just transition must be liberatory and transformative. The impacts of the extractive economy knows no borders. We recognize the interconnectedness of our communities as well as our issues. Therefore, our solutions call for local, regional, national, and global solidarity that confronts imperialism and militarism. 8, build what we need now. We must build the world we need now. This may begin at a local small scale and must expand to begin to displace extractive practices. We must build and flex the muscles needed to meet our community's needs. Reach. The Just Transition Movement principles have been codified in international policies and European Union mechanisms, including the United Nations Paris Agreement in 2015 and at the 2018 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Poland, or COP24. The heads of state and government adopted the Solidarity and Just Transition Silesia Declaration, highlighting the importance of just transition as mentioned in the Paris Agreement, the ILO's guidelines, and the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The declaration encourages all relevant United Nations agencies to proceed with its implementation and consider the issue of just transition when drafting and implementing parties' nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Besides gaining momentum at United Nations climate conferences and in the European Union, the Just Transition movement is alive and active in communities all across the US, being led by workers and people of previously marginalized communities. Next slide, please. The organizers of this event from the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability believe that a healthy local economy, regeneration of our life support ecosystems, and a clean environment can and should coexist. In response to the growing environmental, social, and economic disempowerment of many of our local citizens, our city's economic initiatives must be adapted toward creating a clean, fair, and healthy society for all. Workers and community residents everywhere have a right to housing, healthcare, clean air, water, land, a livable climate, and food. Rising rates of homelessness, addiction, mental illness, food insecurity, and other social manifestations of individual economic and climate insecurity cannot be successfully resolved without addressing the underlying policy and institutional obstacles to sustainable economic development. Finally, We believe that the rights of workers and community members to challenge any entity that commits environmental or economic injustices must be validated in our laws. Climate justice demands two actions: mitigation and adaptation or resilience. We believe that our climate crisis cannot be addressed without also addressing core social inequities. We in the Just Transition Working Group commit to pushing ourselves and our government to do our collective due diligence as public servants to mitigate socio-ecological injustices as much as possible. We believe that our commission should make policy recommendations for improving our city's economic and environmental sustainability in a way that is based on data-driven research and input gathered from local sources, including community members who are formally or currently socially excluded, and which protects the rights of all community members and visitors to our city. Our approach is intentionally consent-based, human-centered, and fact-based group decision-making approach that maximizes social impact and harm reduction among the most formerly or currently excluded groups by examining both policy and institutionally specific approaches. Next slide, please. Next slide, thanks. Our sources for this project and this presentation include these three books, as well as the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the Climate Justice Alliance website. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today in person and those of you who are on Zoom. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Roadsong. Again, my name is Colin Murphy. I'm a Sustainability Commissioner with the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability. And I wanted to take a moment now to introduce our two special guests today, hailing from Oakland, California. They are Maribel Tobias, who's the principal at Environmental Justice Solutions in Oakland and served as the principal for the adoption of the Oakland 2030 Equitable Climate Action Plan. Maribel founded EJ Solutions in 2017 after a decade of environmental and climate justice advocacy on behalf of marginalized and overburdened communities across the country. She has extensive experience in environmental and civil rights, litigation, community-based climate policy development, leadership of regional and statewide climate justice coalitions, and equitable climate, housing, and transportation policy. My dear friend Colin Miller has over a decade of experience as a community organizer, coalition builder, and convener. His skills include community outreach and mobilization, real-time interpretation, and meeting facilitation. Colin is also the former coordinator of the Oakland Climate Action Coalition and currently provides interpretation for the Beta Cáceres International Feminist Organizing School. Today, Maribel and Colin will be presenting on the development of the Racial Equity Impact Assessment tool in Oakland, California, and how that tool has guided climate action in Oakland. There will be time for questions from Maribel and Colin after the presentation. If you have a question during the presentation, though, please put it in the chat, and following the presentation, I will read your question for Maribel and Colin to answer. Now I'll turn it over to Maribel and Colin themselves. Thank you for joining us today.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. I'm very pleased to be able to be speaking with you about the work that Colin and I did as the equity facilitator for the City of Oakland's 2030 Equitable Climate Action Plan. And as Colin Murphy mentioned, the Oakland Climate Action Coalition led this work, and at the time, Colin was coordinator of the OCAC. And we are just very honored to have been among the first in the nation to conduct a racial equity impact analysis for a municipality. And we are proud to say that our work provided a strategic plan for achieving climate equity in Oakland. We see the moment that we are in as a sort of a crossroads. As we all know, to eliminate the threat of climate disaster, we are going to have to make permanent, fundamental, and structural changes to our economy, as well as spend billions, if not trillions of dollars in investments. And if we do nothing to address the existing inequalities and equity gaps that we see, the climate disasters such as fires, floods, droughts, and the rising cost of basic goods will only make existing disparities worse. But investing in equitable climate resilience is the sustainable approach. As we know, climate action to date has typically focused only sort of nearsightedly on reducing carbon emissions. But this approach ignores the fact that no carbon emissions enter the atmosphere without co-pollutants also being emitted. And these co-pollutants have local impacts and impact local communities. And so even though climate change and global warming are global issues, the local issues are just as important for us to focus on and to design our climate actions to maximize the local benefits to our frontline communities. So thank you very much for having us today. Let's go to the next slide. So EJ Solutions is an environmental justice consulting collective that does work with nonprofit organizations as well as local, regional, and state governments. It's our sort of work to make sure that when a government or a certain agency is proposing to behave in an equitable or just way, we want to make sure that they're not just paying lip service to those principles and that they actually implement them in a real way. And so listed on the screen are some of the recent projects that we have done in the state of California, which include working in Oakland to help them reduce air impacts and working with the city of Oakland on several other major projects. So I'll pass it to Colin now.
Thank you so much, Maribel, and thank you so much, Colin Murphy and Nejla and Lauren and everyone from the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability and everyone who is here tonight to do this important work. We do want to start off by acknowledging where we are. So EJ Solutions is a guest on Ohlone land, specifically in Huichin or Richmond, California, the Confederated Villages of Lejeune in Chechnya Ohlone territory. So I lived in Lejeune Ohlone land in Oakland for 13 years, but since late 2020, I've been an uninvited guest and resident on unceded Yurok and Wiyot homelands in Humboldt County in far northern California. And of course, we want to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities who are native to Bloomington and recognize that Bloomington is also built on indigenous homelands and resources. I want to acknowledge the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. And we further want to start off with this quote that grounds us in the importance of what we're doing together, that effective climate action is impossible without racial, economic, environmental, and gender justice. I really appreciate Nejla's orientation to the just transition principles and framework, and this is just another way of saying the same thing. Maribel?
Thank you, Colin. Really, our work in Oakland was to center climate policy on the communities that will face the most harms and are already being harmed by climate impacts. And Colin, can you actually? Yes, thank you. And, these communities are facing cumulative impacts. So typically not just facing one issue, but the impacts and the burdens of multiple issues. And this limits their capacity to adapt to, resist, or recover from climate impacts. And for instance, this is something that we saw in Hurricane Katrina. We saw the communities that were most harmed and left behind. And existing disparities make it so that these communities are less likely to share the benefits of our climate action unless we specifically do something to ensure that they do. And as I mentioned before, climate equity is focused on making sure that the local benefits of climate action, such as improved air quality, access to open space, green jobs, and reducing disparities in access to resources, flow to the communities that have historically been marginalized and who are currently facing heightened climate impacts. And so in essence, the racial equity impact assessment that we performed made it so that we could provide a clear framework to the city of Oakland for prioritizing frontline communities to make sure that their needs are addressed through climate policy. And we also wanted to make sure that because these groups who are on the front lines of climate change, who also live in the areas that are most vulnerable to climate impacts, we want to make sure that because they contribute less to the underlying causes of climate change, they're less responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing the problems. So we want to make sure that we are promoting climate solutions such as community-owned solar, increasing public transportation, and primarily increasing, funding for buses and dense neighborhood connectivity. These types of solutions both reduce greenhouse gases and they reduce inequities. So next slide. One key example of this is the urban heat island. So as you may know, overall poor air quality can exacerbate climate change's harmful local impacts because in areas that face high smog pollution, the smog actually traps, the ambient ozone traps heat, causing those areas to experience more severe heat spikes than other areas. And this is especially even exacerbated in the low-income communities of color, where we're seeing disparities in tree cover and an overabundance of dark concrete that leads to this heat island effect. And what we're seeing is that in Oakland and in California, African-American communities are as vulnerable during urban heat spikes as children and the elderly. So this heightened vulnerability is just something that we are deeply attuned to. And then another issue that impacts frontline communities differently is, as we said, the air impacts overall and the impacts of the rising costs of goods. So we call on you to think about the specific frontline communities within Bloomington who might be experiencing harsher climate impacts now and who will experience harsher climate impacts in the future. So, what is a racial equity impact assessment? It is essentially a framework for ongoing accountability to equitable outcomes. And we have to give credit to the city of Oakland for founding a Department of Race and Equity, which helped bring this forward for the city of Oakland. And our team also created what we're calling an equity screen, which is a step-by-step methodology for reviewing every climate policy that you come up with to ensure it is grounded in equity. So some of the concepts that the REA includes are determine equity by comparing the environmental health, socioeconomic, and pollution burdens facing communities within the city. So oftentimes there's a desire to compare yourself to other cities. We're doing better than that city. But for creating equity within the city, it's most important that we compare the communities within the city. The flower that you see on the screen is an illustration of a whole systems framework for equitable consideration. Every policy needs to provide these types of benefits where it can to frontline communities. And another key principle that we promoted with the REA is it's really important to let communities define their priorities and then work to meet those needs. So meeting priority community needs includes building on existing community assets and cultural values, and not just approaching this from a deficit mindset, but really thinking about the things that people in the community want to preserve and grow as well. And finally, it's included in our REA were several key recommendations and performance indicators to guide the city in both directly and indirectly tracking its progress toward equitable outcomes. And so as you gather quantitative and qualitative data from the community, you want to be sure that all of your climate actions both reduce existing disparities and avoid placing additional burdens on frontline communities. Colin?
Thank you so much, Maribel, for breaking all of that down. So I'll just quickly run through what our equity screen was for the climate policies in Oakland. And so you can consider these for Bloomington as well. It starts off with a robust community engagement process, where, as Maribel was sharing with you, the community identifies their own priority needs to determine whether each climate action first prioritizes frontline communities for climate investments and seeks to maximize the benefits, address priority community needs, which are key determinants of physical, social, and economic well-being, such as cost savings or improving public health, distributing climate benefits geographically that are responsive to the needs of each neighborhood, and or by income and or by race, preserving and strengthening local assets and cultural values, providing for cultural continuity, reducing disparities by remedying or mitigating existing harms such as air pollution, lack of tree canopy, and also avoiding additional harms such as displacement. Second is that they need to hold businesses and industries accountable to improve the environment and restore our communities. And finally, foster local green job creation, entrepreneurship, and cooperative ownership opportunities for members of local frontline communities. Maribel?
So we made a little quick pop-ed explainer video for members of the public to describe our work on the REA, and it's 4 minutes, so we thought we'd go ahead and play it for you now.
I think I need to adjust my settings to share sound, so just give me a moment, okay? Okay, let me know if you cannot hear the sound.
Hi there, my name is Maribel Ngazi Tobias. I'm the founder and principal of Environmental Justice Solutions, a Bay Area EJ consulting firm. It's my pleasure to speak to you today about the work I've done alongside Colin Miller of the Oakland Climate Action Coalition and David Jaber of Blue Star Integrated Studio as the Equity Facilitator Team for the City of Oakland's Equitable Climate Action Plan. Extreme heat, sea level rise, intense wildfires. Climate change impacts us all, but frontline communities who live nearest to climate threats and have the least resources to adapt, resist, or recover from the impacts are harmed first and worst. The Equity Facilitator Team compiled data on Oakland's frontline communities, highlighting the racial or ethnic groups and geographic locations that face multiple threats, including shorefront areas in East and West Oakland threatened by sea level rise and poor air quality. Our Racial Equity Impact Assessment and Implementation Guide, or REA, includes detailed recommendations and resources to help the City of Oakland meet priority community needs and maximize equitable outcomes throughout the ECAP's 10-year implementation period. Climate solutions have the potential to benefit everyone and improve key determinants of frontline communities' physical, social, and economic well-being. But despite this immense potential, equitable distribution doesn't just happen by default. Achieving climate equity means carefully distributing the local benefits of climate action in ways that reduce existing disparities, give historically underserved groups their fair share, and make Oakland a healthy and resilient city. This flower diagram, developed by Climate Interactive, is a framework for long-term, whole-system, equity-based reflection, where each petal represents a category of local benefits that climate action has the potential to generate. Like the REA, this tool helps users carefully select climate policies and programs that address equity gaps and improve physical, social, and economic well-being in frontline communities. The benefits of climate action include increasing tree cover, access to open space, community-owned solar, affordable and accessible public transit, active mobility, disaster preparedness, public health, and employment in good green jobs, to name a few. When these benefits are targeted to reach Oakland's most vulnerable areas and populations, all Oaklanders share the benefits. When careful targeting doesn't happen, we miss a valuable opportunity to use the climate crisis as a stepping stone to a just transition. Key things the REA asked the City of Oakland to do include 1. Establish the Oakland Climate Action Network right away and delegate implementation and oversight power to OCAN members. 2. Develop accessible maps that identify frontline communities for each ECAP action. And 3. Use equity key performance indicators to both directly and indirectly track the city's progress toward equitable outcomes and course correct as needed to ensure frontline communities receive their fair share of ECAP benefits. Thanks for listening.
Right, I hope you all liked that video that Maribel made. I personally love that video, so I can't watch it enough. We're gonna get back to our slide presentation here. Thanks for the applause and the thumbs up in the chat or in the reactions. Sharing my screen again. I think I need to, do presentation mode. Thanks everybody for your patience. Okay, and we're back. Okay.
Hey, Colin, sorry to interrupt, Colin, but there is a Zoom bar that's it's obscuring the screen a little bit. I don't know if you want to move that maybe to one of the borders of the screen. Do you see that?
Yeah. Thank you, Colin.
Sure.
Is that better?
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, great. Oh, excuse me for not seeing that earlier. Great. So we want to share now just brass tacks, like how do we actually carry out this work in Oakland? So community engagement is at the heart, and we begin our equitable community engagement process by partnering with and empowering amazing Oakland residents from every city council district to co-lead the process with us. We recruited at least 2 members of each district, with at least 1 member being from a frontline community in their district. And these leaders proved to be invaluable assets to the engagement process. Their hard work canvassing and doing outreach in their districts ensured that engaged people came to every workshop. In addition, they co-designed and co-facilitated our workshops and town halls. And of course, we made sure to budget accordingly to compensate people for their hard work and time and expertise. So by the numbers, 400 Oaklanders attended workshops across all 7 council districts. Over 800 Oaklanders took our online survey. As I mentioned, there were 18 neighborhood leaders, and together we hosted 5 climate equity workdays and pop-up engagement opportunities where we did things like build community gardens, build tiny house villages for houseless youth, and the like, really to model the solutions. As Movement Generation says, what the hands do, the heart learns. So we really took that to heart and wanted to model the kinds of climate solutions that are equitable. What does a just transition look like in practice? And really appreciate Najla for walking us through the just transition principles and framework a little bit earlier, right when we started. But I wanted to just ground us again in some context around what we mean by just transition throughout this entire process. So crediting Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project for these slides and for this framework. Every economy has these basic elements. Starts with resources combined with work for a purpose, along with a worldview that encompasses all of that, along with a system of governance. In our current extractive economy, resources are extracted in a dig, burn, and dump cycle. The form of work is primarily exploitation, and the purpose is to enclose wealth and power. The worldview is white supremacy, patriarchy, consumerism, and colonial mind, and the system of governance is through use of force or militarism. Contrasted with the regenerative economy that we're working towards and that these equitable climate action plans are moving us in the direction of creating, the purpose is ecological and social well-being. Resources are cyclical and regenerative. Work is done in cooperation. The worldview is that of sacredness and caring, and the governance is that of deep democracy. So when you put all of that together, you can see the strategy framework for just transition, where we're striving to move from an extractive to a living or regenerative or equitable economy. And that is the just transition, where we're simultaneously working to stop the bad and build the new at the top, and at the bottom, seeking to divest from the extractive economy and invest in the living economy. And in the center, you can see there's a down arrow saying change the rules and draw down money and power from the international, from the national, down to the local level, down to the neighborhood level. And at the very bottom, the values filter, the way that we move capital must shift economic control to communities, democratize wealth in the workplace, advance ecological restoration, drive racial justice and equity, relocalize most production and consumption, and retain and restore cultures and traditions. So we did our entire work on the Equitable Climate Action Plan in Oakland with this framework for just transition in mind as well. Passing it back to Maribel.
So, as a result of our community engagement, we came up with a list of the top priorities that the community identified. And as Colin mentioned, we hosted 7 workshops at the beginning. And in those workshops, we used what we called climate action boards, and we populated them with all kinds of different policies from our research and experience that are equitable. And we asked folks to vote on them. And we used a dot voting system, and we also enabled them to suggest their own priorities and suggest any changes to what we had proposed. And so at the end of it, we really came out with a very robust community-supported list of priorities that everywhere we went, people said, affirmed, yes, that is what we want. And so at the top of the list, the actual most popular priority that residents of Oakland found was, really talking again about that money, and wanting the city of Oakland to think and consider ways to divest from fossil fuels and use that money to instead finance the local sustainable economy. One of the key issues that prevents people of color from getting ahead and from being economically resilient is this lack of ability, the being prevented from getting financing and loans. And so that is a key issue that came up in the city of Oakland. To make this shift, we need to shift how we're dealing with our money. Next priority. So the next most popular community priority in the city of Oakland was for the city to increase its support of community land trusts as a viable strategy for preserving affordable housing permanently and for keeping land affordable for local businesses to grow food and to really increase and support local biological and cultural diversity. One of the most important land trusts in Oakland is the Segurite Land Trust, which is run by Ohlone residents of Oakland, powerhouse women. And so we would really love to see more support go to that land trust and others like it. The third most popular priority was a ban on single-use plastics within the city, and that goes along with support for low-income mom-and-pop businesses who might find it difficult to make that transition. The fourth priority has to do with low-cost or free bus fare. During our research for the REA and for the ECAP, we discovered that African Americans and folks in the urban city core, they rely on accessible and affordable transit by way of buses and that dense neighborhood connection network to get to the places where they need to go. So if we want to reduce vehicle miles traveled and get folks out of their cars and onto public transit, we're going to have to address the cost of it as well as the accessibility of it and making sure there are more stations, that they are safe, and that everyone can ride. Finally, on this slide, the last priority was climate justice education and curriculum. So it is a very important priority for Oakland residents that we bring up the youth, and that starting from the very beginning, they are learning about the need for climate justice and ways that they can get involved in the city. Colin?
Awesome. Thank you, Maribel. So just continuing on, Maribel already mentioned, but the need to improve public transit with more frequent and reliable bus service, improve public safety at bus stops with more destinations and amenities. So people are not reliant on their single passenger vehicles if they have access to a vehicle. The seventh was also very popular, community-owned solar, to allow renters and neighbors to benefit financially from shared solar installations. It's essential to have urban planning from the ground up to ensure complete neighborhoods so that daily services are accessible without a car. And this includes creating green pathways and alleyways and safe streets and sidewalks for active mobility. And in doing so, make streets safer for pedestrians, people using bikes and wheelchairs, skateboards and scooters, and the like. And last but not least, supporting more urban agriculture through farming and gardens and access, as well as creating opportunities for people to farm and garden on vacant parking lots. So, Maribel?
Thanks, Colin. So we will just end with some of the high-level recommendations that our REA made to the City of Oakland, and which we hope and believe that the City of Bloomington can take to heart and use as well. So as we mentioned earlier, we consider it important to gather both quantitative data as well as qualitative data, that is, speaking to residents to find out their priorities in order to identify the vulnerable communities within the city of Bloomington. And then as you implement the CAP, please measure the extent to which the benefits flow to those communities and be accountable for that. We asked the city of Oakland to come back every year with an update on how the funds are flowing equitably, and to course correct as needed, to change policy, to increase access if needed, if it's being seen that not enough benefits are flowing to the frontline communities. And we believe that that should be more than their per capita share. So if they're just receiving the same as everyone else, we want to take a second look at that and make sure that there is enough flowing to them to really transform and support their community. And then the second important element of this is that the city should not do it on its own. Our Rhea video mentioned the Oakland Climate Action Network, and that is the city's version of a body made up of local groups on the ground, some of whom will be under contract with the city, and all of them collectively will have implementation and oversight power over the plan. This includes helping to lift up local priorities and really make sure that the city is accountable. Colin?
Along the lines of transparency and accountability, we want to recommend to the city of Bloomington that you create a publicly accessible GIS map that shows all of those different overlapping equity indicators that could be used both by city staff and by the public at large. And along the lines of what Maribel was describing in terms of the Oakland Climate Action Network, and the need for community partnership and oversight authority, that we recommend that the city of Bloomington work to partner with frontline community groups to create a decentralized and neighborhood-based body with delegated power over implementation. And this can also include using the technology of participatory budgeting to be able to allocate funds at each neighborhood level based on the priority community needs, self-determined by that neighborhood.
And most importantly, the city needs to examine all of its internal policies and procedures to make sure that they are addressing equity considerations and not barriers to equity themselves. To implement a cap that requires so many more supporting plans and different departments within the city. And so we just ask that there be collaboration and streamlined partnerships to make sure that that all of the city's internal policies are addressing equity. So I think that brings us to the end of our presentation.
Yes, just want to thank you all so much for your time and attention and for your work so far and into the future.
Please join me, everybody, in reacting with an applause or a heart in the in Zoom for our special guests. Thank you very, very much, Colin and Maribel, for devoting time to speak to us tonight and for that super rich presentation. I think there's so much there that we can unpack and utilize. And as someone who's spent significant time both in Oakland, which I consider my home, and here in Bloomington, it's easy to kind of mistakenly think that there are these sort of intractable differences maybe between the two places, but really I think there are these shared histories and trends of gentrification, of systemic racism, of redlining, just to give a few examples related to racial equity, that both places actually have in common. And so that's why I think that this framework that Maribel and Colin have presented to us tonight is applicable for sure in this community. And so right now what we're going to do, well, first of all, before we transition to the next section to breakout groups, I think we have time for one or two quick questions. If anyone had any questions on that presentation for our guests, feel free to raise your hand if you do have a question for them. And we'll take maybe two maximum.
Yeah, if you have a question, I will, it's a little bit complicated. If you do have a question,
So we have one question in the chat, which is, what challenges have you faced with implementation, presumably in Oakland?
Colin, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of attention and energy, and momentum, and movement that was built. And, you know, Colin Murphy, you were part of that momentum and movement that was built in that time leading up to the passage of the Equitable Climate Action Plan. And, you know, now the ball is somewhat in the city of Oakland's court in terms of staff and how they are moving forward. I think really that Oakland Climate Action Network, that neighborhood-based, oversight body is really, really critical. And unfortunately, we haven't really seen that moving forward in the way that we recommended specifically to the city that it be done. From what we've heard, it's kind of being approached in kind of a more of a top-down manner without real neighborhood-based and community-based accountability. But I will say that Maribel is a key player in supporting the long overdue Oakland General Plan, specifically the new environmental justice element mandated by SB 1000 for the Oakland General Plan. And so we have a question about how the Equitable Climate Action Plan can and should be intersecting with implementation of Oakland's ECAP. So I'll just name that one wrinkle, and then Maribel, perhaps you want to speak on that.
Sure. So on that question of the internal policies and procedures that need examination, in order to essentially carry out the plan, the city has other plans that it impacts. So there's an urban forestry master plan. There are transportation planning and improvements. There is housing, and the housing element is a component of the general plan that the city of Oakland has just embarked on its update of that. And so there are the external plans that the city of Oakland is making or has made that it will need to adjust, as well as how it operates internally. We recommended that they really bring together a task force to make sure that the different departments aren't operating separately and aren't getting in each other's way. And so really, that's one of the key things that we aren't seeing necessarily yet in the city of Oakland. For previous climate action plans that they have done, they have tended to just operate in a very ad hoc way. And that was one of the things that we advocated for. We advocated for dedicated funding to be allocated at the outset to support the strategies in the CAP. But what we're seeing is more of an ad hoc basis of finding funding for this action or that, and it's all happening very disparately. So that is kind of a challenges faced with implementation, as well as an example of internal policies and procedures that need to be examined and changed. And then the final question I see in the chat is about the tension between decentralized versus centralized responses to climate action and examples from Oakland. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Colin, do you have a thought?
Yeah. So the acknowledgement that Oakland is not a monolith is, is sort of an obvious statement, but, Maribel led and facilitated the West Oakland air pollution reduction plan with the AB 617 process, and I was involved prior to joining EJ Solutions with supporting the leadership of the East Oakland Neighborhoods Initiative. And those are two really incredible community-based and community-driven participatory planning processes that were a little bit different, but had a lot of things in common in terms of that decentralized and localized neighborhood-based approach, acknowledging that the solutions come from the local neighborhood and should and the decisions should be made by or have that self-determination question, right? Of the neighborhood should be determining what the best solutions are for them. However, the city of Oakland has a long history of operating in a very top-down manner and kind of imposing policies and funding upon neighborhoods rather than allowing for neighborhoods to self-determine what their priorities are and what funding should be allocated to them. So just one more example is Community Democracy Project has been working for over a decade now, and I think this time around will be successful in gathering enough signatures by the deadline to submit a ballot proposal for a fully participatory and democratic budget. We were inspired in part by this example, as well as the previous two, West Oakland and East Oakland examples, in what we proposed to the city in the racial equity impact assessment for that, climate action network and delegated authority and oversight over the city. So we'll see how that goes.
Thanks, Colin. I can just add to what you said by saying that the city was actually a participant and at the table in co-designing both the West Oakland plan and the EONI plan. So that decentralized model actually works really well, and it works better if the city is part of the planning process as a partner and is bound to and accountable to implementing the neighborhood-based plans. So that is the case with both EONI that Colin mentioned and West Oakland. The city of Oakland is required to implement those plans as well. So that's one way of easing some of that tension.
Brilliant. Thank you both for those insights. Great. So we're going to proceed now to the second part of the main event. So we're going to spend about 30 minutes in breakout sessions where we're going to be answering 4 questions. Before I read off those questions really quickly, the breakout groups will be, since we have about 22 folks on Zoom, if it's okay, Colin, Maribel, we're going to give you each 11 folks to take, and then the in-person attendees are going to be, will be facilitated by, I think, Commissioner Roadsong or Commissioner Hardy here in Bloomington. And so the questions themselves are, what do you want to change about your community? What do you love about your community that you want to protect? What are the key equity gaps that you are seeing in your community and or neighborhood that should be addressed by equitable implementation of Bloomington's climate action plan? And lastly, to achieve a just transition due to climate change, what types of solutions would you like to see to increase well-being for all? So facilitators, go ahead and make sure that you give the group enough time to answer each of these 4 questions. And I think Assistant Director of Economic and Sustainable Development, Clemens, is pasting the 4 questions in the chat now, and she will be breaking up the folks online into those 2 breakout groups. So we're going to give this until about 7:40. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
And I think it'll just take a minute or 2 for Director Clemens to break everyone up.
Here, the first one we're going to discuss is, what do you want to change about your community? Oh, great. Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Yeah, so what do you want to change about your community?
I'd also encourage you to enable your cameras, since it makes the breakout discussion a little more intimate and potentially fruitful. Thanks a lot.
Hand up. That one? Oh, okay.
You all
Other
on the other
questions?
side in the breakouts.
Okay.
Great. Okay. So if
Sorry,
anyone
I was
has-
on mute. Hello.
Can you turn the screen off?
Hello.
Maybe people can
I
concentrate
think
a
we're
little
still
better.
waiting.
Or the sound is
Goes.
perfect. Okay. So yeah, what do you want to change about your community? And if you could, for the recording, please address your comments into this microphone here. Thanks.
The changes that I want to see addressed in my community would be the equity and
Yeah, we can hear you.
okay, cool. Would be the equity and access to different programs in the community, and the as well as the what's the word? Not clarity, but where things aren't hidden. The openness of some of our community.
Transparency?
Yes, there we are. The transparency of some of our commissions as well. For instance, the climate action plan was taken under advisement, but not like it was saying actually the city has not been held accountable to actually implement those things. I think the main things I would like to see is housing first initiatives, harm reduction, and education about the importance of harm reduction.
Harm reduction regarding specifically.
Multitude of things. Harm reduction regarding housing first, harm reduction regarding the climate crisis specifically. So the intersectional approach of it, and the worry that many of our departments are siloed and not taking those things into account.
Just one follow-up, sorry.
No, you're good.
When you said the access to different programs, what kind of programs? Could you give a couple examples?
Sure. So, oh gosh, applying for commissions, the people or being seated on the commission, many of the people that I have spoken to who have applied haven't heard anything back at all through the city's website. And as well as the hand programs, I think there could be more.
Like the assistance programs
Yes.
they have for local community members?
Correct. I think some of the information is just hard to find and not well communicated.
Okay, thanks. All right. Anyone else? What do you want to change about your community?
This may be obvious, but I would just like Bloomington to place the climate emergency at the top of its priorities. I would like that to kind of come to be recognized and come first when we think about responsible city action. For example, there was a proposal a little while ago of a local income tax for climate initiatives, which was turned down because people don't like taxes, which I understand. But now there's talk of a local income tax for there to be more money for the police. That feels like that is a backwards prioritization. We should not support local income taxes for other municipal things until we have our climate action program adequately funded. I think it'd be great to see much more ambitious ideas about rooftop solar and other renewables, which will get us out of the corporate fossil fuel industry clutches as much. I feel like that is a good, profitable, potentially equitable thing that just requires the capital investment. So I'd love to see that capital investment.
Thank you. So it sounds like you'd be a fan of the community solar programs that they mentioned.
Yes.
That they developed in Oakland. Great. Anyone else? What would you want to change about your community? And then we'll move on to number 2.
I would like to raise the floor for everybody. I would like to see a universal basic income trial here in Bloomington.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to question 2. What do you love about your community that you want to protect? What do you love about our community in Bloomington that you want to protect? Because co-chair Joseph is coming to share his thoughts.
Yeah, honestly,
Thanks.
I only hesitated.
Sorry, I forgot your last name.
Oh, that's fine.
There.
Joseph Winia, yeah, co-chair of the Commission on Sustainability.
Yeah.
Honestly, there are a lot of things about this community that I really appreciate. One of them is actually transparency, as a matter of fact. I think the city and the administration have done a great job, particularly with the Be Clear open data portal. I think the city website's also an extraordinary resource that makes all of its resources easily available and accessible and knowable. I think there's also a good culture of awareness already that I think is important to maintain, and a good diversity in the community. And those are all things that, I don't know if they're necessarily directly related to the RIA discussion, but I think things that I love about the community and think are important to maintain.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yes.
What do you love about your community that you want to protect?
The things that I would like to protect in my community would be the people who are here year-round. I think that sometimes we prioritize IU and the students over the people who live here the whole year. This is not to disparage the students or IU, but that funding and housing can oftentimes be waylaid by those things, particularly the student housing, overgoing our need for other housing. But as I was saying, I like to protect those, but I would also love having IU here as that resource. So that is another thing I love about my community, as well as our natural areas and our land trusts that are already implemented here.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to question 3. What are the key equity gaps that you are seeing in your community or neighborhood that should be addressed by equitable implementation of Bloomington's climate action plan? So again, what are the key equity gaps that you're seeing in your community or neighborhood that should be addressed by equitable implementation of Bloomington's climate action plan? Key equity gaps.
It's fine, you'll get me every time.
Okay, great.
The equity gaps that I see are primarily around transportation in my area. There's still not a bus route to Ivy Tech, and while it is not within city limits currently, there is still a way for us to get a bus there. We just have to work with the county with it. The rural transportation bus is wonderful, but it is not consistent. Thank you. Rural transit is not consistent to that, as well as generally just sidewalks and the frequency of bus stops. There are bus stops that only stop twice a day, and those are a lot of the times in those lower income communities who are pretty far out of the way because, again, can't afford the stuff further downtown. So I think transportation is one of the ones I would love to see.
Thank you. Yeah, and as I was a former faculty at Ivy Tech for 5 years, and specifically getting city bus to go there is also a key interest of mine that I've voiced for several years. So I agree that should be a top priority as far as equity goes.
I think it's mentioned in the climate action plan.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What are the key equity gaps that you're seeing in your community or neighborhood that should be addressed by equitable implementation of Bloomington's climate action plan? And so, sorry, what was your name?
Kate Cedar.
Kate? So Kate was mentioning transportation, specifically bus, access to bus system is one of those key equity gaps, not just to Ivy Tech, but in lower income neighborhoods where the bus may not stop very frequently and or they may not have bus stops.
Hi.
Hi.
One thing that worries me, I've lived in some communities where participation is really magnificent, and I've lived in others where it's really non-existent. So I think it's very important when creating these initiatives to create, to really think through an action plan and process on how to encourage civil participation in education and civil know-how to really promote folks that are more vulnerable to speak out and to know how feel like they have a place, like they belong, that they can actually speak out and that they own the place as well. So just basically that too. How are we going to encourage civil participation in the most vulnerable communities?
So the equity gap could be in feelings of ownership and empowerment in the
Civil know-how,
process.
education, yeah.
And feeling empowered to make changes.
Correct.
In one's neighborhood, and maybe to control funding.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
I hope I was kind of summarizing what you said and not putting words in your mouth.
Oh, no, you
Okay, good. Yes, please.
We can also wrap up your.
Got one more question. Okay.
Well, I'm still kind of new to the area. One of the first things I did notice is that there's a large homeless community, local on both sides of town. I just wasn't aware of what programs or for mental health or housing assistance that are available to participate in or support in the local community.
Thank you. So access to housing resources, specifically for those who are unhoused, and mental health resources. All right, let's move on to question 4. To achieve a just transition due to climate change, what types of solutions would you like to see to increase well-being for all? What types of solutions, in order to achieve a just transition due to climate change, what types of solutions would you like to see to increase well-being for all?
I'd like to see the solutions incentivized and maybe the effects of all the individual plans and actions So we can generate more community investment into those programs. A lot of them might seem like they stand alone, but if you show how they're all related and how they benefit everybody and the outcome, or an outcome-driven proposal, I guess, to basically create stakeholders and everybody that's involved.
And could you be more specific on what types of incentives you might like to see for community participation?
Maybe the outcome of a like an urban farming program where you can show that this many people were served, a quantitative kind of approach to kind of put the numbers in people's minds so they can see just what the programs are producing. A lot of times I think it might be just a perception issue in generating support, but yeah, if people can get a hard outcome in their minds, they may be more invested in it.
So regular monitoring of the quantitative benefit, measurable benefits, and reporting that and making sure that information gets to the community so that you keep up that incentive for participation.
Yeah, showing the output of the programs.
Okay, thanks.
I may be stating a bit of the obvious here, but class is a major issue and a major equity gap that exists. What I would like to see, I know is politically difficult, but would be for there to be elements that tax or disincentivize the rich and other high carbon activities and behaviors, and that would then be redistributed to provide local food, low carbon transportation, when applicable, access to renewable energy sources for people who are low income. That's complicated, of course, but that's what I would like to see.
Mm-hmm. So more targeting the emitters of carbon and other types of pollution, specifically for higher taxes to disincentivize that activity.
Yeah, I think there's a whole host of things you can do that both tries to offer opportunity and access to programs to people who are low income, but then also the flip side of that is how do you disincentivize and make sure the cost of that is coming from the people from the behaviors that are the highest emitting.
Yeah, there are probably other incentive options besides taxes that the city has as well that may fall into that same idea.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
Thank you.
Hi. I would like to see food deserts addressed. One way would be with more school gardening programs, and then having being able to sell that when before children go home or as parents pick their kids up. And then, of course, universal basic income. It's going to address all that stuff and raise everybody's floor. But yeah, food deserts, gardening programs at every school, making sure there's access to healthy food and foods that myself and a lot of other people would never come in contact with otherwise.
Thank you.
So in terms of the financial ways that we could get the money for it, there's the two things of, I know Indiana has laws against a progressive income tax, which I think is one of the things that would really help be able to more equitably tax so that we could take that money and put it again towards raising people that are affected the most. And the other one left my mind, but that's all right. In terms of climate action plan, it's again the sustainable transportation, public transportation, it is the public solar and public housing, as well as continuing to work with our local nonprofits who have already starting to be put in this work. I know right now MC Iris is working with the city on their reforesting plan, specifically to take away the calorie pairs and invasive and replant. Something I love that they had was a racial audit map about our city's tree cover, and it's really cool. It kind of sounded like the other map that they were talking about, but it's specifically regarding tree canopy, as well as working with things like Mother Hubbard's cover to address food security.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, Joe here again. Solutions that I have in mind are a couple of different, or threefold, I guess. The first is a focus on food and water, particularly local, like hyper-local production within like individual homeowner properties, and not just even local farms, but all the way supporting as much as local as possible. I think I'd really like to see emphasis on resource reduction as well, and not trying to get everyone to a high consumption way of living, but to get everyone to a low consumption way of living. And then lastly, to follow up on a comment that was mentioned earlier about the importance of citizen engagement and just full collective participation, and not a push to insist on just a governing body to do all of the changes that are necessary, but to have everyone participate in every capacity everywhere.
Through more like volunteer, neighborhood kind of volunteer programs, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's implemented
and education as well.
By the communities themselves.
Yeah, so educating the community and getting the community to participate in all the changes necessary, instead of having a municipality do all the changes for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so we've had a lot of great ideas. I don't know if I can summarize all of them, but there are definitely a lot of parts in common with having action that prioritizes community-led action and accountability for programs at the top level by local neighborhoods. I think we have, yeah, I mean, I've got a couple more if we need to fill the time.
So,
okay.
Just wanted to allow anyone, if you want to stay around and chat, they're going to continue talking on Zoom. But the next meeting that the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability has is on April 12th at 6 p.m. And so we'll take all the findings from today's presentation and the feedback, and we're going to share that with our city council and with the mayor's office after this event. We'd like to invite you to be engaged with the commission generally, and appreciate you coming today. And just some of our commissioners that are in the audience right now, if you could raise your hand if you want to say hi, meet them. We meet every month, and it's now hybrid, so it's in City Hall. And I appreciate you coming and being patient with this hybrid, first hybrid event in a while. So really appreciated you being here today, and it's been really helpful to get your feedback and perspective. So if you want to stay around and chat, feel free. And I'm going to put the screen up so you don't have to watch them have a Zoom meeting anymore.
All right, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming tonight.